That's great. That's I want to talk just a brief second about a personal experience of connectivity, and it was a positive experience, and one of those kind of brings back to the gut experience. We had a CE5 event on the 16th, and I had just met a guy, a comedian out of Central Florida named Mike Murberg, a really nice disability attorney, and we decided to do a CE5 contact. And what we wanted to do was meditate for them, vector for them, our group up in New York. And so we concentrated and we vectored, and everyone has notepads and writes down on their pads when they get feelings and do their meditations and, you know, their whole 9 yards. And we got at like 9 o'clock, we got a message, and the message was this one right here. And it says the time, 10:15, and after that there's going to be 2 craft circling, and there's even a little picture of the, I don't know if you can see it down here, of the location, what the CE fibers would be seeing from their location. And then after 10:15, there's another flash. It says 2 flashes there. So we sent this information to Mike at 9 o'clock and said, wow, we just got this. It was really intense. We got a message. We have someone that we think we're communicating with, a group we think, and that our communication has gotten more and more and deeper over time. And so we definitely got that message. And this message, the person who got this message had goosebumps up and down their arm and knew something fishy was going on. And other members of the group was like, yes, yes, yes. So anyway, to make a longer story short, after 10:15, we started getting texts. Wow, wow, oh, wow, wow, wow. And then this is gobsmacking. This is the most gobsmacking night. And he's got several videos out you can see on Lutopia, the blog and stuff. This is exactly what happened. They had 2 craft that circled, flashed at 10:15, and then just afterwards they had more. And that is what their location looked like, with 2 big oak trees in the foreground. And so it was a validation of the power of the subconscious, connecting people, positivity, and a lot of these principles that we're talking about now. And
quickly, did the information that you just shared with us, the heads up or advance notice, was that also written up as part of the report?
Yes, it was written up. The pictures are written up. And in fact, the testimony of 13 witnesses on their side, and there's videotape. So it's pretty well done. So we want to take this kind of experience and take it to the next level with multiple scientific equipment, from optical spectrometry to black body radiation detection, multiple different types of camera, infrared, high speed, and see if they allow us to. Now, I would like to get to a point that you said just really briefly. I don't want to monopolize any time, too much time, but you were talking about why some encounters are allowed to be seen or not. I think if you take into account their ability to read the subconscious, and if you believe that they care about the environment, for situations like Skinwalker Ranch, for example, they had NIDS there, scientific team, they had cameras, they had everything. They thought they were going to capture the experience and all this stuff, and that would have been privatized. All that information, any scientific data they would have gotten would have been privatized and would have gone to probably destroy the environment a little faster and make another Mark Zuckerberg. But instead, the phenomena chose not to give them the information, not even to give them too much camera work, just to play trickster. And I think if Desta was that phenomena, Desta would have played trickster too. And I think maybe Joe, if you were the phenomena, you would have played trickster too. And I certainly would have as well too. So we think the right group has, and the right people have the right contact. I think if you even see one at any time, there's a reason for it, and they allowed you to see it.
This is something, can I interject here really quickly? This is something that is a very direct segue into something I was hoping to bring up during this rabbit hole meeting. I attempted to reach out to the organizer for this event called Disclosurefest. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with this event. It's the main organizer is Adrian Valera, and this happens in LA. It just happened last weekend. And it's interesting because he had people on his panel that were big names. He had Corey Good, and he had all these people who are very current and doing big things. But as far as the marketing or the advertising of the event, it very much wasn't so focused on one aspect. It wasn't so much like a UFO event or experiencer event. It was more all of these different things like yoga and consciousness, and which is great. And I saw a great potential for something huge. They had 10,000 people there, and so I reached out to Adrian and I emailed him. This is I gave a little detail in the email to you, AP. What I wanted to say to you was that, and what I actually proposed to him was, what if there was a coordinated CE5 driven guided meditation, because they do guided meditations with this event on that kind of scale, like that quickly. What are the implications of something that large? Can you get that many people in one sitting to follow the protocols? And it was actually also streamed on the internet. So the guided meditation was participated in by an even larger number. And my hopes, of course, as being a connector and sort of a conduit of taking the left and the right side and trying to put those things together. My idea is that, I emailed him trying to put him in touch with you, AP, and with Grant, and as to say, can we make this happen? Can this be an actual thing? Can we make this a larger? Yeah, there you go. There, like that. If we can make such an event like this,
well, it's happening.
It's focused. Right.
There's several groups bringing groups together. Costa at ET Let's Talk has created a network of 10,000 CE fibers. And we have this is our network just in our group. And so we literally will have people around the world concentrating on our events coming up in the future when we have all of our cameras and scientific equipment. These are literally, all those pink marks are real groups in each one of those areas. We've got Ashley in South Africa. We've got Mark in Tokyo. We've got literally groups all over the world, but we don't have as many as Costa. But your point is really good, that the more we unite, the more we connect, more consciousness, more power, more, as long as, we're teaching, putting the power in the people's hands. It's awesome. I think it's
I think it was the potential is there to have something a little bit more focused, because he doesn't have that sort of focus as far as any intent. It's more just an all-around thing. But I find it funny that it's Disclosure Fest and that he's, it's a free event. And so if we could bring that scale of an event to happen, we're talking, tens of thousands of people,
and imagine if you use that power of positive thinking, not just for UFO contact, but healing.
Absolutely.
Or situational wars, other things where we know consciousness affects the universe. And in fact, our group has been doing stuff like that. We've been doing healing and remote viewing to try and help people along the way, and results and stuff. And I think, if we all kind of practice what we preach and try and be that, positive force, I think that can be a step in the right direction, at least.
Well, in this event, it includes all of that stuff. I mean, they have a vegan tent. It's very much vegan oriented, and consciousness in general. And they have a sound healing part of it. The huge potential there. I really hope that he gets back to me. And if not, maybe y'all could reach out to him as well.
I wrote down his name and his info. I wanted to dive into something
cool.
that totally different turn for us all, but some people are talking about it in the chat, and it sure sounds interesting. The whole notion, recently Dr. Thomas Campbell has raised enough funds, a couple of you are smiling already, to test whether we are living in a simulation or not. And he has several innovative tests to see whether we are living in a simulation. And my question to you guys and to throw out to the group is two questions. One, does the fact that we are testing to see if we live in a simulation, does just that fact, is that indicative of a possibility that we might be near the end of that said simulation? And two, if we detect that we are living in a simulation, could this precipitate the end of the simulation because the simulation is no longer unbiased? So Dr. Thomas Campbell could be killing us all.
Can I say something about this?
Absolutely, please. It'd be great if everyone gave their thoughts in this.
Yeah. I'll try to be real brief. That with this simulated reality that we live in, what I envision, and I'll go back to the conscious web. So let's look at it this way. We want to try to step outside of ourselves, or step outside of the web, and then try to figure out who's driving, who's driving it, right? So let's do that. Just like, we talk about the ETs, and they kind of know, or whatever they are, they know what we're going to do, right? Ahead of time. So in quantum physics, you have spooky action at a distance, right? So one particle experiences something and instantly the other one does, right? Instantaneously, no light speed, it just happens, right? Now, in a my view of this simulated universe is exactly that. It's exactly like quantum entanglement, where what happens with us living in this bubble, everything happens at the right time, at the same time, to all of us. I mean, it is so big. I'm trying to wrap my head around this conscious web, because it is in control. And I don't think we can step outside of it, because there is no outside of it, right? So I don't know how they're going to try to come up with a way of figuring out if we're living in it, if you can't step outside of it. How do you step outside of consciousness if all the new science is pointing to an interaction between consciousness and the quantum field?
I'd like to recommend a 5-part series. It's free. It's on YouTube, called the Holographic Universe, where all these advanced concepts are dealt with graphically, simply. These are complex concepts, and I have watched the series twice. I'm going to probably watch it 2 or 3 more times. So I recommend everyone check it out. It's called the Holographic Universe 5-part series, especially parts 1, 2, and 3, the best.
I got a question here. I wonder how the holographic universe, if that would fit in with the multi-universe theory. And are these multi-universes all holographic also? And then, of course, the dimensions within the universe that seem to be there.
Yeah, there's a lot. Go ahead. Candace.
No, you go ahead.
No. They've heard enough of me. Haven't heard enough of you.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the transhumanists would love this conversation. The idea that we're part of somebody else's computer program or something. And the idea that we can recreate life with AI and that kind of thing. When in fact, I agree with you, Robin, that all is consciousness, and we're all just simulations, you could say, of oneness of the entire consciousness. And so to try to top that, I think is pretty silly. That's just my view. I think that we're way bigger and better than that.
That's great. I agree with that, and the reason that I agree with that is that if this is a simulation, then it's code, and that we have the power in consciousness to hack that code and to rewrite that code. And if that is indeed what we're experiencing, then it may not be about going outside of the realm, but manipulating the realm itself.
That is Dr. Campbell's whole perspective on it. Dr. Campbell talks about hacking the code and hacking this reality and consciousness. You do have free will, but there's a causality loop that happens with the interaction with the program, and it's really fascinating. There's a guy named Jerry Willis. I believe his last name is pronounced Willis. He had a really fascinating experience where he went to this monument door. I believe it was it Peru, Odessa, it was in Peru, and I forget the name of the special monument door portal, and you're supposed to hit the right harmonic frequency when you're there, and he hit this frequency, and he fell backwards in his mind, and fell through this kind of strange portal universe, and then ended up in this blank white room. And there was an intelligence there, and he saw this strange thing that looked like kind of pudding or something with some bars across it, and he walked over to it, and that was supposedly our universe, and these bars were kind of supposed to be preventing the universe from spreading, and a computer intelligence told him, you know, this is your universe, and we created it, and it's growing faster than we can control it. And it's a very compelling, interesting story about the universe being a simulation.
Real quick, but this is very interesting. I remember the last rabbit hole, I mentioned that it feels like somebody gives me information. Remember I said that? Something is giving me information. I put it in my book, and then 2 months later, you know, there's some news about whatever it was, right? So you just mentioned the white room. This is really interesting. Here we go. My third book, the one I'm writing now, is called the White Room. And then you mentioned mist or some foggy stuff, right? Just like the what they call dendros or something, or whatever they're called. There was this mist involved, right? So I'm telling you that there was a scene in the third book, the opening scene, where white mist shows up, a being shows up, the being talks to this person, and then takes this person to the white room. And in the white room, it's described where it's so white, and this fog is so thick that, you know, you can feel it rubbing against your skin, blah, blah, blah. You can almost smell it. But this being talks to this person about existence. And it kind of shocked me when you mentioned this white room and this.
Talking to him about existence, yeah.
Yes, and this being is showing this person, there's a door, and outside the door is basically reality. And where there are people learning things about reality outside of that door, but they were looking outside from within the white room. Very interesting, this white room thing. And I was waiting for something to come up in tonight that is already in my book. It's already written, because the more this happens, the more I'm going to start to believe even more that I'm being handed information. And I told you about this quantum computer that I kind of designed just out of my head from the book, you know, and it could maybe simulate consciousness because it has organic parts, you know, microtubules and neuron stem cells and all this kind of stuff. So, I mean, keep talking, because the more you guys talking, if I hear stuff that's related, I'm going to jump out of a window.
Okay, well, if it's a simulation, let's just go with that for a moment. Some kind of simulation, not like a computer, but that's the best word humans can use to describe it. If it is some kind of simulation, what is it for? Is it an ancestor simulation, like some people believe it is? Is it for entertainment?
I think it's to experience. I think
now that is my belief as well too, because
I believe it's all about experience. And I had a brief discussion many years ago with Linda Moulton Howe at an event, and what we talked about, I believe that as part of consciousness, if you want to say it's a simulation, I guess you could call it that, but it's a way to experience and have as many experiences as possible. And that part of it is like the main consciousness. We're like avatars. I mean, each and every one of us. And sometimes we're living more than one experience at a time. And that's the way I see it. I don't see really past lives as past lives, or any of these weird experiences I have as anything as other than part of myself, but another aspect of myself. And the more, it's about data and information and learning and growing and doing as much as we can to do that. And some of us that had these experiences, like Doug, I felt really sorry for him, but on some level, that is a learning experience for him. And we've all had our bad experiences, and some of them have not been about the weird kind. It's just everyday thing. I mean, we forget that there's people living in another part of the world that are living literally in a different world than we are. Their experiences are so far removed from the way we live here in the U.S. or in Canada. I mean, you can't even go there. But I really do believe it's all about experience and getting as much experience as possible. If I was God, I would be damn bored if I had nothing to do but just, control the universe. I would want to experience it and learn and just get as much of it as possible. And it would be never ending.
Well, that's interesting, but why? Why does it have to be for something?
Does it have to be? Why does it? Why is there a why? Maybe there is no why. Maybe it just.
Well, yes, that's my point. That is exactly my point.
No, I agree with you.
I heard a wonderful.
Like love, it's like love. Like why? Like you ask somebody, what is love for? What? You know what I'm saying?
It just is.
It just is. I wrote a song, Love Just Is. So maybe what we're experiencing just is.
There's a lot of fun, just fun speculations as well, too, rabbit holes to kind of go down. One that some very prominent physicists discuss, one of them is Dr. Jack Sarfati, who I've spoken with a few times about this, is that our universe is run by a computer, perhaps, or an AI that we created. And in the future, it's running massive simulations to find the only way it could experience is through this simulation. And so that's an interesting notion that this AI destroyed us, and in the future, it longs to acquire more data, and data that can be acquired only through being a human. Of course, who built the computer? There's always a rabbit or a turtle on top of a turtle shell, on top of a turtle shell. There's very few ultimate answers, but it sure is fun to dive into the waters and explore the possibilities.
Well, on the physical, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. On the physical side of things, theoretical physicist James Gates a few years back discovered a code that is the code is how is embedded in the way that we describe the universe or reality within superstring theory. And this code, it's an error, exactly, it's an error correcting code. It's a very specific kind of code that goes back to programmers 30, 40 years ago. There's a specific programmer, there's an actual very specific code that it resembles. But what's really interesting is that when they fed these through a system for creating a physical representation of this code, they look like UFOs. They have these structures that are very much just like UFOs and hourglass figures and such. So I just thought that was something I should add.
Oh, that's super cool.
Research.
Also an error correcting code. I'll get you in just a second, Steve. I'm sorry. It's an error correcting code that when you send information, it double checks to make sure the information is accurate. So how cool is that? If it is a simulation, they found this weird computer code in reality that double checks to make sure reality's reality.
And what if that's
why would nature need that
correcting thing when we're experiencing?
Absolutely. Hold on. I'm sorry. I cut off Steve.
Yeah, those error codes James Gates discovered. He claims that they're the same error codes that you find in browsers, and he called them adinkras. And if you look up adinkras, they're African symbols that have been around for thousands of years. Anyway, I was going to say about our discussion on quantum reality here, that what we experience with our five senses is only like a small sliver of the total spectrum of what's out there to be experienced.
It's a great point.
And there's like a veil at the top end and a veil at the low end of our what we can experience with our five senses. Now, if we're living in a quantum or a computer simulation, then I tend to think of those veils as firewalls. The beings, the extraterrestrial beings, they actually exist on the other side of that firewall. And they're kind of like custodians that kind of program things that we experience. They have subroutines that they develop that can be kind of downloaded to us for us to experience. So I believe they're basically in control overall of what we're experiencing. But they allow us this free will. We have like free will to some extent. But when it comes right down to us, they can override that if they wanted to. And so
wouldn't that explain, extra dimensional characteristics, or like if a UFO were to be able to enter and exit our reality very quickly? I mean, wouldn't it make sense that that could very much be just a physical representation of those who are controlling things to enter a simulation and exit a simulation?
exactly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Or diving down into it. If you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, there's only this small little area that we can sense in the spectrum, and it goes all the way to, from gamma rays to radio waves. And there's just this teeny tiny sliver, and that's just of the electromagnetic spectrum. And there's all sorts of other fields out there, from Higgs fields and all this other stuff we still haven't even completely nearly discovered. So there is that very interesting gimmel, that consciousness field. And many people believe that everything is conscious, right down to a single subatomic particle, and that's how it knows the double slit experiment, where companion is, its twin. So it's just a good thing to back up your point, Steve, about how little our senses can perceive of the universe. That's a really cool point.
Well, they talk about the measurement problem. When you observe, like in the double slit experiment, when they were shooting photons through the slits, and they put a camera in place to observe which slit it went through, it changed the result of changed the outcome of the experience. And so they're saying that the observer is part of the outcome of what happens. And when you're observing it, it doesn't act like a wave, it collapses into a particle. And so this is the reason that I find it difficult to accept the Big Bang theory, because they say that that's how all matter came into being, through this Big Bang. Well, there wouldn't have been any observers around at that time. So how could that happen?
Good, wonderful question. You've got me
Are
stumped.
any of you familiar with biocentrism?
Yes.
Well, biocentrism kind of says that that consciousness it goes into exactly what you were just talking about an observer, and how that consciousness, it talks about life coming first. And then everything else kind of coming around later in the form of consciousness and perception. If you ever get a chance to read a book, I can't remember the name of the scientist that wrote it, but it's a very, very interesting idea.
When you think about it, it makes total sense. There's matter that makes up a brain or whatever that has consciousness. But if you don't have consciousness, the matter is meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. So like Steve was saying at the beginning of the universe, there's no consciousness to see it. Well, maybe there was a consciousness. Steve, maybe you were right. Maybe you proved that there was a consciousness back at the quote unquote Big Bang.
Well, that opens up a whole new can of worms then.
It does. That might explain Grant was asking, well, who programmed the computer? Well, maybe it's the programmer it was watching. I've got an interesting thing just to throw out there. Animal instinct. There are animals that know information that they've never seen before. They know how to build intricate nests. There's incredibly unique mating rituals they've never seen before, but they faithfully and flawlessly recreate these things. I don't know if you guys have seen the birds of paradise in New Guinea. They have these crazy, elaborate mating dances that each species has. How do they know that? Where does that information come from? Is it, some people are saying cell memory? Is it quote unquote instinct, or is it somehow what it seems like it could be, a genetic memory programmed into it? Or are they tapping into this consciousness field?
Morphic resonance. Morphic resonance, I think, is what Rupert Sheldrake was calling that. Like everything goes to a certain form, and that form knows its function.
Kirk, I don't know you. Would you introduce yourself?
Oh, Kirk Morgan. Experiencer, lightweight experiencer. I'm the one that's opening up the experiencersingles.com thing. And I've been, I don't know, I'm possibly an experiencer for a lot longer than I know, as it's turning out.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that.
No problem.
Neat. Does anyone else have any topics or anything? You know, we got the last half hour approaching us here, so
I want to hear Grant talk on this subject. Grant, if you would be so kind, sir.
This is what he doesn't want.
Well, somebody mentioned the book Biocentrism. I think people should read it. And to give you the backstory of how I learned about the book, because it's basically the same sort of idea that I got in my download in 2012. This is this Chris guy from Hollywood who contacted me about 8 months ago or 7 months ago, claiming he was having all these things flying around and all this kind of stuff. And so I told him it appeared the phenomena was interacting with him. You should interact with the phenomena. They must want to talk to you. And so he asked the phenomena, he said, if you're an alien or whatever you are, put something in my head that I don't know already. And he said in his own voice, this word biocentrism popped into his head. And so he went and looked it up, and it is, as was described before, life creates the universe, consciousness is primary, there's no time, there's no space. It's basically sort of the new version of the holographic universe idea. It's written by Dr. Robert Lanza, the first guy to clone an extinct species, and identified by the New York Times as one of the top 3 scientists in the world. And Chris is now going to be doing a documentary on this, and Lanza has given him his assistant and said, I don't want any money, I want nothing, you can put out this documentary. So I would say that is something we should look at. When it came to the cell thing, one of the things I was looking at recently is this idea that everything came from one cell. So as AP has described, there are some amazing things that animals can do, and the one is the termites. The termites in Australia and Africa, where they build these huge 15-foot mounds. And if you've seen the documentary on them, it has an air conditioning system that's built because in a termite mound, it has to be 87 degrees Fahrenheit. If it gets 2 degrees too hot or too cold, everything dies, and they can maintain at below freezing and at 100 and some odd degrees. They can maintain this 87 degree temperature inside with this air conditioning system, and everybody knows what they're doing. It's like the hive, which sort of goes to the alien mentality, is everybody's doing their job, everybody's basically knows what to do, and if you destroy the hive, they instantly start to repair it. They know exactly how to repair it. All the animals are, the termites are totally blind. And it goes back to this idea I was just looking at recently, is this idea that I talk about the cell, the unbelievable ability of a cell to reproduce itself. And people just assume, so we use naming theory. We say, oh, it's just a cell, it just reproduces itself. And Lanza shows this example in his book, talking about random. Is the universe random, or is it morphogenetic field type things that Robert Sheldrake talks about? And he talks about this idea that if you have 10 books on a shelf, and you want to put them alphabetically randomly, it'll be 3.6 million different chances to do it. If you take 20 books randomly on a shelf and get them to randomly set themselves up as in alphabetical order, it'll be something like 10 to the 18th power. There's like literally no chance that it's going to be doing, and yet you have a human cell that will reproduce itself, and what it'll have to do is you have a cell, and it'll have to source 100 trillion atoms. Random, and the idea is this random or is this not random? And it'll have to take those cells, or the atoms, and put them all in the right order at the right time in the three-dimensional space, and then give them life, and it'll do this all in 16 hours. And you take a look at this thing with the 20 books. I mean, there's absolutely no chance. Or the idea where we say, oh, it's random. If you have a million monkeys and unlimited time to produce, they could produce all the works of Shakespeare randomly. And so he basically takes from the book Moby Dick, he takes the idea, I am Ishmael, 15 characters with spaces. And he said, if you have a million monkeys all typing on computers for a million years, I think he said it would take like something like 15 trillion years to produce that one sentence. Forget about the entire works of Shakespeare. So if you take a look at, and I'll end on this, if you take the cells, the idea that all the cells, like they divide. If you take it, go backwards, it'll all go back to one single cell, which would indicate that the first cell that was on the earth has all the information for all the animals, all the plants, all the human beings, and it sends that information, and it just keeps doing itself. And we just sort of assume this is a random process, and we use naming theory. So we say, oh, it's just a cell reproducing itself. It's just this kind of stuff, which makes no sense, that a cell can reproduce itself in 15 hours with 100 trillion atoms, and that cell will reproduce itself, and that cell will reproduce itself, and that within 9 months, there'll be 100 trillion cells in the human body that all know what to do, and there's 3 million cells dying every second in the human body, and all those cells are replaced. And you start looking at this kind of stuff, and it's just like almost like the idea that this is random, that there's not some sort of consciousness behind this is, what's his name? Terence McKenna used to say, this is the limit case for credulity in the modern world. If you can believe this, you can believe anything.
No, and I really recommend everybody get a copy of the book. I read it a couple of months ago, and it really changed a lot of the way that I look at things. And like you were talking about the things that animals seem to just do. People have done it too for thousands of years. Look at all these people that live in rainforests and these indigenous peoples that have all these herbs and all these little cures that they find from plants. And when you ask these people, they pass it down to each other. But when you get down to it and you ask them, how did you know? I mean, what do they do? Go around eating plants, and if you didn't die, it was okay? No, they couldn't live like that. They wouldn't have survived. So, what it comes down to is these people, if you ask them, and I've read about this, they say, how do you know that plant will cure your warts or whatever? They say, well, the plant told me.
Yeah. And anybody in psychedelics will tell you that, if you do the ayahuasca, that suddenly the plants are talking to you, like Sting when he had his, he saw this little plant coming out of the crack, and he said, there's my brother. Everybody suddenly realizes everything's alive and everything's conscious. And it's sort of that awareness that you get. So it's to me, it's just an amazing universe where we're sort of just putting things down. Like the one thing I show, like we were talking about the computer. Is there a computer? All you have to do to show how amazing this thing is, I do this thing where in lectures sometimes I show the rat brain and the F-22 simulator. And I talked to George Fowler, who was a major in the U.S. Air Force who briefed generals and stuff like that. And I said, George, how hard is it to fly an F-22 simulator? He said, it's not easy. They did it at the University of Southern Florida. They take 10,000 neurons. We have 100 billion neurons. They take simply 10,000 neurons from a rat brain. They put them in a petri dish. They wire wires into the bottom of this thing, and after 3 days, these brain cells start to interact with each other, and they form this little brain. They're talking to each other, and then they teach it to fly an F-22 simulator, and that's with just simply 10,000 neurons from a rat brain, which if I sat you and me in front of a simulator, we'd have no idea what to do. And this little thing, and then they would change the wind, and they would change the weather and make the worst possible conditions, and these 10,000 neurons from a rat brain continued to fly an F-22 simulator.
Intense. You wonder about the conscious and then the subconscious. You know, the conscious is what you think you have control over, and then there's the subconscious. And, you know, this brings up a notion that a lot of people believe in, is because we're all one, we're all connected, that we all can literally connect to each other and to anything in space and time. And remote viewers try to do that. This Akashic record, or the monad, or the Lyman, or whatever you call it, that everything can tap into that potentially, all the way down to a particle. So there's a lot of different perspectives on this, and just the journey into it is really, really fascinating. For me, I'm fascinated with consciousness, but I'm even more fascinated with subconsciousness. There's so much we don't know there, and the powers there. Does anyone have any thoughts about the subconscious mind?
Yeah, I would like to say some things. I'm sorry, my English is not as fluent, but I'll give it a shot. Regarding the simulation, I think that our subconscious mind can get in contact with the origin of the simulation, which might be non-physical, because the type of symmetry that it would have to have would probably have to overcome the Gödelian, the binary logic limits pertaining to our physical universe, for our universe to be either complete or coherent in Gödel's terms. The programmer of our simulation would have to be non-physical, but that makes it non-mechanical, not like the typical computer. I would be more inclined to think of experiencer, consciousness experiencing the simulation. And once we become aware of the simulation, then we could probably, let's say, make the rules more flexible, alter the simulation in that, like you were saying before. Not that we are controlled by another intelligence, which is mechanically, more developed, but it's a matter of consciousness. Okay, that's one thing that I wanted to say. And another thing that I wanted to say is that in the case of the Rama contacts that originated in Peru, I know that there have been very, 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 very few abductions in the traditional sense that we know. Most of the contacts are super caring and positive. They do, however, they might produce fear in the beginning. But that's why these beings telepathically gave us a set of gradual contact adaptations procedures to work with them. And it's more like working with a specific extraterrestrial group. I don't know if these are only the 5, 6, or 7 density types, because they can also manifest physically, that we can perceive them physically. But the contacts, for the most part, being very, very, let's say, peaceful. Once you overcome the initial contact fear, then subsequent contacts are much more easy. But what they said is that there is a like a vibratory and energy shock, or that our bodies instinctively feel. So we react with fear. It's an energy shock, which can be palliated or diminished through certain adaptation practices. For example, breathing, mantras, diet, gradual contacts also, they provided a gradual contact experiences, not necessarily all at once, boom, they are there, like in some abduction experiences. I also wanted to say that I do agree that there are horrific experiences, but that they are a minority. According to the free survey, of which I was part of designing it, maybe 90 to 90% of the contacts could be eventually called positive or constructive. But I do not deny the possibility that some unique experiencers like perhaps Corey Good, Emery Smith, and others, are also telling us about experiences that do not show in the survey. In the survey, there's very little or nothing, I believe, nothing that relates with the secret space program. But while my friend Ray Hernandez then sees this as an evidence that they do not exist, this secret space program it's a fantasy or something. I do not. I think that it might exist, and there's certain and only a specific experiencers like these guys I mentioned might be telling us the truth. So I suspend negative judgment against that. Okay.
Can I raise a question? I'd always thought about, and very rarely has anybody answered it. You mentioned, Giorgio, that the Mission Rama is a particular type of being, and it's basically that group. And I've always wondered about this. Why is it that an experiencer never really has an experience with one particular type of being? It'll start with the Greys, then the reptilians come in, then like Chris Bledsoe, then you got a spiritual type being coming in, and you always have these multiple type beings as if all the beings are sort of working together. So I want to sort of throw that out. And as to the fear thing, one of the things Chris told us from Hollywood was that he was told by the being that when the beings come in, and this was something that John Mack brought up at the end of his life, where John Mack sort of indicated that the being that you actually encounter is maybe based upon your mindset. And what Chris had said that he was told by the being was, whatever you've got in your head is what we work with. So if you have a fearful mindset, they will use fear to teach you a lesson, because they have nothing else. They can't be raising other issues if that's all you have in your head. So they use what's in your head, what your structure or your belief system is, to operate.
I think there is a lot of truth in that. In the case of the Rama ETs, they are very specific. They came with a specific a mission which they asked the people to perform to help them also connect PowerPoints, receive information about the lost history of the world, at least part of it. And they also apparently work, and which is something I believe, they work with spiritual masters of the White Brotherhood under Lake Titicaca and different places like in Mount Shasta also, and also in the Gobi Desert in Mongolia. It's a specific group of ETs that have a specific mission with a specific group of people, many of whom feel that they made an agreement with them before being born. And what they say is that for the most part, they protect the Earth and humanity from unwarranted incursions into our system, but that also there are other beings which are different from their particular contact program, which might be perhaps performing many of the abductions that we hear about and other types of contacts, but that they are also allowed and that they're not necessarily negative for the most part, except maybe for a few negative beings that have a right to be here, unfortunately. It's a very complex issue, the who is who among the ETs.
There's a lot of cool theories. One of the theories that I'd like to believe, and I believe, is that if you were an advanced creature, would you fly all the way across the universe and risk your physical body and risk your life? Or would you create creatures that you could avatar through? You could see through, you could touch through, you could do all of that through. And you might, or I would, create a variety of these, and I would send them out. And they would have the interconnectivity of a hive mentality. Being an ultra advanced civilization, you would think that being able to have a certain level of collective consciousness would be very beneficial in terms of information gaining and other things. So, I have a belief that there's a lot of hive mentalities amongst these advanced civilizations, and that a lot of the reasons why people get different experiences, even within the same possible group of ETs, is because these are created artificial life forms, even the ones that we think are the leaders. There's a statistical thing that happens when people encounter ETs. It's oftentimes one tall leader and two small shorts. So it'll either be a tall praying mantis, a tall white, a tall robot. You can look through the data and see it's very regular. And then two other beings. Sometimes the two other beings are oftentimes small grays. But it seems very much like a, factory, press out this, press out that. And maybe it's exactly what, Grant and others have been saying before. They read your consciousness and know what you can deal with and what you can't and what works for you. And if all you know is fear and anger, maybe that's their way to try and communicate with you.
I think a common factor is that whoever is contacting us, they work through our subconscious minds and also subconscious beliefs, and perhaps subconscious arrangements and possibilities, whether they are the benevolent space brothers or the most negative types or in between. The subconscious is key.
Yeah, there's an interesting point that Giorgio mentioned, this protocol that's used by Mission Rama. And then I was very interested in AP when he described this being, which sounded like a natural type being. And they're using basically the same type of protocol. And the same with Joe Burks. They're using the same type of protocol. And Joe, I don't know if Joe mentioned tonight, there's actually an incident that Adamak talked about in 1994, which sounds like exactly the same type of experience.
Yeah, I think there's certain groups, and they are here for a reason. And I think the numbers are going up, the encounters are going up, the connectivity is going up. I think people are being taught how to do this subconsciously. I didn't know how to do this stuff. All I knew was meditation, and I knew the power. Just in my gut, I felt like harmonics and mantras and mantras that created a harmonic effect amongst people would be something that might vibrate throughout the universe, things like that, and experiments. And I think what happens is, like I was saying before, it starts distant, it gets closer, it gets closer and gets closer, and before too long, it's phenomena happening around you, or portals, or direct contact, or other things. And I think there is this escalation, this school you go through.
With that said, do you think that there's something to be said for a CE5 groups of people who are more seasoned experiencers? I mean, would you think it would help to have events that are more oriented towards, experiences who are lifetime experiencers rather than people who are just stepping into it?
Well,
or that you would get more out of that is what I'm asking.
I think it helps to a certain degree, but oftentimes it's really more about the CE5 experience. It's not really as much about their previous experience or experience. It's being able to go through those protocols. Because sometimes your past experience can negatively affect now. If the experiencer was like Doug and had a horrific experience, you will not get a visitation. They will not show up, period, because they can read the consciousness of everyone and know that that person is going to be too frightened. And we've had this big thing with fear. Just once they went from distant to 500 feet, fear starts, and then 300 feet in treetops, you're actually excited, but you're mixed with fearfulness. Then when the other effects start happening on the ground, then you really start getting more fearful. And I have a beautiful stream and a river rock where I can go out there and I can meditate, and I go out in the middle of the woods at night. We encourage our meditators to go into their attics, go into their basements and meditate in the dark, and challenge that sense of fear. And so I think you get what you can take to a certain degree, and you'll be taught if you're in the right place mentally. And I think this can happen, honestly. It doesn't necessarily take a group. It can be one person. And although there's protocols that we follow, like vegetarianism, because we think it's a very logical, elevated, enlightened thing to do, but maybe perhaps you don't even need that. Maybe perhaps it's strictly about your mental state and that connectivity.
I wanted to raise a point, AP, about I don't know how many people know David Huggins. Do you know David Huggins? Grant, do you know David Huggins?
No.
Well, David Huggins is he lives in my town. He's an experiencer most of his life. He's 72 years old now, and there's a film made of him that's out right now called Love and Saucers.
Oh, someone just brought that up. Yeah.
I posted that, and I encourage everybody to go watch this. And one of the reasons why I brought it's a fascinating film. David's a wonderful painter, and he paints all his experiences. And one of the reasons why I wanted to bring this up, AP, is that I noticed that he has these three beings all the time in the room, smaller ones and then a large one. And there's always this combination of 1, 2, and 3 around the scenario. There's always a mantid being watching. There's a woman that he has sex with, and then there's smaller gray. So David Huggins, I sent it to Desta. I sent the link to Desta of the film Love and Saucers, the life of David Huggins. And I was actually surprised to find out that I'm in that film. I didn't quite realize it, but I was over at David's house one of the days they were filming it, and I forgot that I had spoken a little bit about my impression of David. He's a fascinating artist, a fascinating person that everybody on this list should know something about.
Thanks, Deb.
That's
Okay.
very cool.
Well, can I raise one last point here before we shut down? You mentioned when you had your encounter, AP, I asked you when this being started to come out of this fog thing, which is similar to a Zendra type experience. I said to you, what did you do? And you said nothing. You were absolutely petrified. And this does come across that we can sort of interpret this as sort of evil aliens or whatever, but there seems to be something that, whether it's the fear of the unknown, or whether it's, I remember Chris Blesso telling me this story where he had this craft land in the back, and he got on all fours and he was crawling under these trees to get close to the craft. And I've heard this before from other people. You get to a certain point of the craft, and then he was overcome by fear. He didn't see anything, but he was overcome by fear, and then he started to crawl back out again. He thought, well, that was stupid. And then he turned around, he crawled back up again, and he got to the same point near the saucer, and he couldn't get any closer, and he turned around and went back out. And that's when he had the gun. He went there with a gun. And he said these two small 3-foot beings, if you've seen his drawings, with the red eyes, were standing there at the fence as he crawled back under the fence to go back into his yard. And he said he was never so embarrassed in his entire life that he had this gun. And he said he gave away all his guns. He was this major hunter in North Carolina, gave away all his guns. So there's this idea that sometimes when the beings are around, they can sort of exert this sort of fear, whether it's a protection mechanism or whatever it is. And I was kind of taken when you said, I asked you, I said, what did you do? This being starts coming out of the Zender, what did you do? And you said, everybody just sat there and just petrified. Nobody did anything.
Yeah, there's an automatic kind of fear. And I think that's the case with the unknown. And it's even kind of like, almost like a car accident. You're kind of like frozen. Time kind of stands still, not necessarily because of some electromagnetic field, but because of the immense nature of the data that's coming into you and that your brain is trying to process. It's really, it's a privilege, but it's more than that, I think. I think once you start making communication, I think it kind of starts becoming a responsibility, even if you want to continue to make communication. It's an advanced civilization, and if you're privileged enough to be making this contact, you're essentially an ambassador for humanity, and you're an ambassador both directions. So there's a lot of different things that go through your head when you're making contact. And, my thing is I never allow negativity to come in. Before we wind up, it'd be nice to talk to Desta. Desta, you've had some experiences. Do you want to share anything with us, Desta? No, thanks. No. Okay, well, gang, I think we're going to wrap it up then right on time. Grant, anything you'd like to say in closing to everybody?
No, thanks for everybody for coming. This is quite a different discussion and very enlightening. And I think it was very, very enlightening to me to listen to what people were saying. And I think we can do this. I can do it unlimited amounts of time. So maybe in a couple of weeks, we'll send out the invite. Everybody's on the list. And if anybody has any subjects they want to bring up, just let us know, and we'll do it. Thanks for everybody for coming. It was absolutely fantastic.
Have a good one.
Take care, gang. Love. Treat each
Beautiful.
other well.
Good night.
Bye.
And thanks, AP, for hosting. You did a
My
fantastic
honor.
job.
My honor.
Good job.
Thank
Okay, good night.
you. No.
Bye out.
Let's stay on and party, everyone. Oh my God, I can't believe he said that. Oh my God, I can't believe she said that. Oh, blah, 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 blah.
This is when the real party starts.
Yeah, let's get into the
No.
stuff they were too scared to talk about.
Good night.
Thanks, y'all.
Good night, y'all.
Thanks, AP. Thanks, everyone. Take
Much
care.
love, everyone. Great stuff, Strange. Great stuff, everyone.
Thanks, you too.